I've been in need of a workbench for some time now. If you've watched any of my videos, I'm sure you've seen me sanding and hacksawing on the floor of our deck. Not only that, but we have a ton of wood out there that's in the weather. I wanted to design an enclosed workbench for the deck that the wood could be put inside of, therefore serving two purposes. This miter saw is actually an interesting piece of tech I've had for about a year. I'll have to do a review on it sometime. But it's just a 20-volt cordless miter saw, and I've been able to cut everything from 4x4s to the wide 3/4 inch PVC. You'd think a battery-powered miter saw would be underpowered, but this thing really isn't. The internal storage space of the workbench is to be 4 foot long, so I can fit a 4-foot board into it. I used some 2x4s that were slightly longer than 4 feet and cut some tendons on the end of those. I'd never really cut tendons before, but they came out okay. Sometimes you just see a process and you pretty much know how it goes, and so you just guess. And normally it comes out okay. It was kind of fun to be working with chisels and working with wood at a much more close level. I made sure I pre-drilled everything before I put it together. It just made everything a lot easier when it came to the final installation. For the sides, I have vertical supports that run in between the top and the bottom plates. These are just all screwed together. The ones on the end are 1x1s, and these are eventually screwed into the 4x4s and help hold the sides to the 4x4s. I always love getting to the point where you have whole structural components complete. It just feels so satisfying. I've never done mortises before, and they ended up being probably the hardest thing of this build. When I was creating the mortises, I made sure I made them extra deep because I didn't want the thing to bind up when I was putting it together. I'm really not sure what the best practice is here. This is just kind of what worked for me. Don't criticize me if I'm using my chisel wrong. I have really never chiseled much before in my life. In fact, when it comes to any of my tool use, it's pretty much been learned by trial and error. So I just find that to be a very instructive teacher in a lot of these things, although occasionally it is good to learn some things. During this project, I really wish that I had a driver. It would just make it a lot easier for drilling these screws, but yeah, well, use what you got. For the top of the workbench, I wanted to make sure I had plenty of support, so I put 3 2x4s across the top. And then a single one across the bottom. This would also be used to help support the plywood inside of the workbench. I could have connected the two sides with more 2x4s, with more mortises and more tendons, but at this point I was kind of over that, so I just decided to drive angled screws into those. And it ended up being just as strong as I would ever need. It may not be as elegant, but it works and it saved me a ton of time. I had to create a little sill inside of the 2x4 at the bottom for the plywood that's inside the workbench to rest on. I made this top from a 3/4 inch PVC board. The reason I did this is that I figured it would be pretty water resistant and it wouldn't warp over time. However, the only drawbacks I can see with it are it is really soft, so I think if I hammer on this, it's going to get dinged up pretty quick, but I can always replace it. It was a little wide, but it ended up being just the right width that I could stick a piece of aluminum on the side and just rip along it with my circular saw. This plastic is incredibly dirty. Afterwards, I looked like a snowman with all of the plastic bits clinging everywhere. I debated buying a jigsaw, but then I decided to just use my little handsaw to cut these corners out of the plywood bottoms. Once again, you just gotta use what you have on hand. No need to spend more money than you have to. I like using these small finishing head screws. They go in very nicely and they just have a very small head and just clean up really well in the finished product. I also use these on the plywood for all of the sides. All of the other structural components were held together with star deck screws. Basically, I built this thing as if it was a deck because it's going to be sitting out on our deck and it has to hold up under those circumstances. For the doors, I just made them out of 1/2 inch plywood. I cut small strips that would go on the face of the plywood door. Basically, this was just to try to keep the door from warping. I could have just used a single sheet of plywood, but like I said, I was a little worried that that wouldn't hold up. So the small strips were just mitered and then glued right to the face of the door. I only have 2 clamps, so I couldn't just hold this together with glue. I pretty much had to go through and screw all of these boards onto the front face of the doors. I used Euro hinges for the doors. I'm not sure how they'll hold up out in the weather, but they make the whole installation and adjustment process so much easier. If you've never used these, you really should look into them. They hide away really well, and all you need to adjust the door is just a screwdriver. Plus, the hinges are so easy to take on and off, so you can just remove the door for finishing. I put a door at each end of the workbench, that way I could access the material on both sides. There's always all these small bits when you get to the end of a project that you gotta finish up to make it work the way you want it to. And it might be tempting to leave them off, but I find that it's really the small details that make things what they are. I ended up using deck stain. I was able to get this in a quart size, which I was happy about because even a quart was more than I needed. Once again, the idea was to make this thing weatherproof so that it can sit in the snow, in the rain, and it'll hold up for several years. I put some small casters on 2 of the legs. This allows you to pick up the one end of the workbench and wheelbarrow it around. The only issue is with all the wood in there, it must weigh like 300 pounds. And yeah. I did put all the wood into it, and it's very nice to be able to store this wood somewhere. Over the past little while, you guys have been saying over and over again, Josh, you need a workbench. And I've been like, yeah, I'm working on it. So here it is. I hope you guys liked it. If you did, give this video a thumbs up. Noisy. Wanted to thank you guys too. We're almost at 1,800 subscribers, and that's just great. We're almost at 2,000 then, second after 1,900. But anyways, that's just great. So thank you, and I will see you guys in the next one. That's it.